Welcome to episode 122 of the GTO on 5G. It's the latest insight scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 20 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel and. Let's get started with my first topic. Both you and I spent time with 5G Americas in Dallas this week at their analyst event. And so I thought I would start off and share some insights and would love you to do the same when I'm done. But at a high level, I thought it was a great event. First time that it's come back to in person in a few years post pandemic. Neville Ray is now the chairman of the board, and they cycle through different operators because they have to be sort of the Switzerland. And we'll talk more about that in a minute here. But yeah, Neville kicked it off, shared his insights around the growth of 5G. Did a good job of not, beating his chest. He likes to do that with T-Mobile, but it's all good. So that was great. And then I love the format. The second day were a series of roundtables, and also the general counsel for the FCC kicked it off on the second day, doing a fireside chat with Chris Pearson, who's the president of 5G Americas. I really found that fireside chat was very insightful, to hear from the general counsel and kind of get a behind the scenes look at what they're considering. And one of the big takeaways for me was just what they're doing to do better synchronization and coordination across different government entities with respect to ensuring planning for future spectrum. I mean, I think one of the challenges and one of the reasons why the US is behind other parts of the world with mid-band spectrum is that it was almost an afterthought. There was a lot of waiting, and then all of a sudden the auctions began. And certainly the US is in a pretty good position, but I think other parts of the world were much further ahead there. But so I thought that was interesting. And then there were a number of breakouts, roundtables. The big highlight for me, I attended the telecom policy and regulation breakout. I was the only analyst in that breakout, so I got to spend a lot of time with Samsung, Qualcomm, as well as Ericsson. And so it was a great discussion. We talked a lot about policy and how it all relates to the digital divide. And so, again, really insightful couple of days, but would love to get your insights on what you found interesting.
Yeah, I also attended as you did, and I think we both did a pretty good job of not replicating our presence in those roundtables.
Right.
Although I think you did enjoy joining me for the last NTN one.
Yeah,
Uh, I think the NTN one was actually very interesting.
it was.
Probably the most interesting session because there were a lot of very knowledgeable people there that gave some very interesting insights. I do have a recording of those conversations, so if anyone would like to hear what happened or what was talked about, feel free to reach out to me. I can share those. Texas is a one-party state, and I think that it was just really like a good thing to see everybody and to talk to everyone. Um, I think 5G Americas is definitely one of the best groups out there for connecting all of the Americas and all of the operators in a way that I think is more kind of directly connected to the analysts, right? Because the whole point of 5G Americas is mostly to be an advocacy organization, but the summit itself is very much a analyst focused summit. But I think there's a lot of really good people that go there from pretty much every company. And I think what's really great is not just the operators. It's also, the Ericssons, the Nokias, the Qualcomms, the Samsungs, the Intels of the world. And I think it's a really good summit. I think there definitely could be more that could be done to make it interesting. Specifically, more one-on-ones. I think those would be great, but those kind of happen organically.
Sure.
And I just think that, unfortunately I was delayed, so I missed Neville's talk. But I think there's a really good, healthy conversation going on. I personally think Verizon should be there, but they never have been.
Right.
Apparently, they were involved early on, but they haven't been since. And I think it's a mistake on their part because they don't really get to participate in these conversations as a result of their lack of involvement. And I also think, they were a big motivator of stuff like CTIA, as was AT&T. But maybe it's because, 5G Americas was more CDM, more GSM focused. Maybe that could be why. But I just think it's a mistake for Verizon to sit out. And I enjoyed it, and I'm glad I went, even though it was a very short period of time. And yeah, it was good to see everybody and participate in a lot of talks. There were some metaverse conversations. Unfortunately, I tend to dominate those because of my background.
Right.
But no, I think it's really good. And the cool thing is there's a lot of people who are involved in like the standards setting,
Right.
and having those kinds of deep knowledge experts involved is always a good thing.
I agree. And I'm glad you mentioned, the representation crosses operators and infrastructure providers. One of our biggest fans of the G2 on 5G, Peter Linder, was there from Ericsson. It was great to see him, connect with him. He's also a fellow road biker like I am. Just a great guy. He's out at CODA. And I just got to throw this out there because the Formula One is in Austin this weekend. I've been critical in the past, last year when I attended with the cellular coverage. And I actually reached out to CODA. I have a friend that actually knows Bobby Epstein who runs that, and didn't get a reply back. And let's just say Peter did a speed test out there that was less than impressive. And I did share that on social media. So if you want to catch that, you can. But
I'll make sure to retweet it from the G2 account so people can see it.
Yeah, right. So we'll retweet that, but I don't want to bemoan that. But let's move to your first topic this week, and you actually do want to talk about Verizon. I did catch this news. They posted some pretty impressive numbers with their FWA service, and you want to share some insights there.
Yeah, so they actually had some kind of, I would say, mixed results. The mixed results being, one, that they did report that they've now passed 1 million fixed wireless subscribers, but they also are continuing to have subscriber losses, even in spite of these fixed wireless gains. So their stock is down big time. They are down 29% this year, and they are at their lowest stock price since 2011, so over a decade.
Wow.
So I really think that a lot of this has to do with Verizon's overly aggressive marketing of 5G, and I think their overly aggressive marketing of millimeter wave. I can't necessarily fault Verizon for having to go millimeter wave because there was no spectrum available to them.
That's what they had. Yeah.
Right. I completely understand that they had to make do with what they had, but the reality was they were marketing millimeter wave as if it was going to be available everywhere and enable experiences all the time. But what they were delivering was DSS, and it was so bad that people were literally turning off 5G to get a better experience. And that's actually the predominant perception of 5G for a lot of Verizon customers. And then what ended up happening is a lot of Verizon customers saw people on T-Mobile going, hey, my stuff's going gangbusters. I'm getting 500-600 megabits per second in my living room, and you can't get 100 megabits outside. So this massive difference in experience and I think overall user satisfaction has really hurt Verizon, and it isn't something that I think happened over a year. I think this was a 1, 2, 3 year horizon thing where people just got fed up over time. They didn't really see the fruits of their efforts until this year, I think, because people take time to switch mobile carriers. They don't get fed up over a week. They usually get fed up over months or years, and I think this is a consequence of that. And I think Verizon's network is going to get a lot better. It is already getting a lot better. Right. But I think next year you're going to probably see Verizon turn things around. And I think that they're going to have a much better network that next year. And I think they're going to start to, potentially bring back customers. I think the biggest challenge, and I think I mentioned this in the details for this post, prices went up as well. And, it's really hard to steal away customers when you increase your prices.
No, I agree. And I think you nailed it. It was their marketing of millimeter wave, their ultra wideband service. And as you know, most in the industry know, millimeter wave provides great performance, but it has very, very poor propagation. And so you're only going to find that in, major metropolitan areas. And they're launching their FWA service, and they're still building out their mid-band network. And so I suspect some of the churn is related to the poor performance. We've talked about that on prior podcasts. They have a very aggressive price on their FWA service with a bundle with their mobile service, but it's pretty poor. So I agree with you, and it's interesting. I'm going to talk about AT&T as my third topic in earnings, and it's sort of a tale of two cities or a tale of two coins there. But let's move to my second topic this week, and I'm going to talk about Verizon as well. So I hope Verizon doesn't get too upset that we're thumping on them a little bit. But our friend Mike Dano at Light Reading posted an article recently around Boeing. So Boeing's a huge company. They have over 140,000 employees. They're number 65 on Fortune's list of world's biggest companies. And so they use AT&T as their primary mobile provider, but Verizon was their secondary mobile provider. Well, they've made a decision to move away from Verizon and roll with T-Mobile. And so, this got me thinking, what really drove that decision? We were just talking about Verizon, I think some missed expectations with their 5G deployment. And I think certainly this is it. I think there's another factor here though, too. And you and I are working on a Forbes article. We attended the T-Mobile Analyst Summit about a week ago in Bellevue. We're a little behind on that article, but we're going to try to get it posted next week. But T-Mobile for Business is really making a huge run, and they've got a lot of big logos. So Alaska Airlines is probably one of their most prominent high-profile enterprise customers, but they also have General Mills and AutoZone as well as customers. So, I think this was probably a decision on Boeing's part, looking at the trajectory of where the big three are at with their 5G deployment, looking at the capabilities with T-Mobile's fixed wireless access service and the speed and performance of it as well. And so I think at the end of the day, the decision was made based on some of Verizon's missteps and where T-Mobile is really sort of pulling themselves up, by the bootstrap with respect to the enterprise. But I'd love to get your insight.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that we've noticed is that T-Mobile is definitely making a lot of movement on their business side. I think this is just a good example of them executing on their strategy. I also think that helps Boeing as a local company. So I wouldn't be surprised to see if T-Mobile moves up to their number one carrier of choice over time. Because there's something about Washington companies, they just like working with each other. And I think that they're going to continue to move up the chain. T-Mobile wasn't really considered a business company for a very long time, so this is going to
not even 2 years ago. Not even 2 years ago.
So I think this is just something that's gonna it's gonna change the dynamic of competition, because now a lot of businesses are going to have three choices, and they previously only had a binary choice. So when you add that third opportunity or that third choice, I think it promotes a lot more competition, which I think is the whole point of the T-Mobile Sprint merger. So I think this is going to be making a lot of changes within the industry. And T-Mobile's fixed wireless business is very focused on offering a third option, or even a second option in some cases, for small businesses and even medium-sized businesses to have fixed wireless nationwide. Right, they're literally the only ones that can offer fixed wireless service nationwide.
Good point.
I think this is just one of those things where Boeing's big enough where they're looking at somebody like a T-Mobile and saying, hey, you know what? Like, this is an absolute right fit for us as a backup. And I apologize for the sirens. I live next to a fire station, but I think there's just T-Mobile is the right fit, and we're really seeing things change considerably for them now.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Competition is a great thing. I didn't initially connect the dots on the fact that, both T-Mobile and Boeing are in the Seattle area as well. So that might be, that might have been sort of the icing on the cake there. But great insight, my friend. Let's move to your second topic, and you want to talk about Starlink and the possibility of them branching out into the aviation sector, right?
Yeah, so this is something that I think was announced this week. I saw this from Peter Cohen over at RCR. Basically, what it is, it's a satellite broadband service that promises up to 350 megabits per second with no caps for 25K a month, in addition to $150,000 in equipment costs, which is not outrageous for aviation internet equipment.
Right.
But what's interesting is, Starlink used to be a fixed wireless service only, and then got the ability to serve RVs and boats, I think. And now we're looking at them being able to serve planes. And what's interesting about this is, it introduces more competition into the space, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's going to improve connectivity, hopefully, and improve scale. Because one of the biggest problems that I find satellite companies have is just getting enough scale to be able to be profitable. And
Mhm.
we've watched so many different satellite services go down, go
Yeah.
bankrupt due to not
OneWeb.
getting,
Yeah.
you know,
As an
OneWeb is
example.
not alone, right? Like I think Globalstar went bankrupt at one point. Almost I think even Iridium was close to bankruptcy if they weren't already bankrupt. So everybody's had these things happen, and satellite business is not perfect, but it seems like SpaceX is doing a pretty good job. And I'm actually wearing my SpaceX shirt today, which is not on purpose. Um, but yeah, I just think that there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the fixed wireless space, which is becoming less fixed. And then, the wireless space is becoming more fixed. So it's really interesting to see. I think this is also interesting because this could also potentially be an opportunity for 5G in planes
Yeah.
if there was some kind of NTN, you know, connectivity. Right now, it looks like SpaceX is doing a proprietary kind of communication thing that they're doing with their existing network.
Yeah.
And then there's some, talk about how Starlink is being used in Ukraine and shutting it off and turning it on and all the craziness around Elon himself.
Yeah.
But overall, I think this is a really interesting service because there's more and more demand for internet connectivity up in the air.
Yeah, satellite is getting really hot right now. I mean, we've been talking about it on prior podcasts, NTN, non-terrestrial networking. One of the challenges you pointed it out is it's the Wild West right now, and there's a lack of standardization. And I'll actually mention that one of the points that the FCC General Counsel, and I'm forgetting his name, we'll be sure to include it when we post the podcast, because he was a very compelling speaker. But he sort of spoke to that and said they view satellite as the new frontier. It's changed quite a bit, going from geo to LEO, and more birds in the air, and so they're having to sort of revisit policy and regulation there. But they see it as a very innovative element. And it's and when I spent time recently with John Stankey at AT&T, we talked about satellite as well, and he views that as an element that's going to be a part of how they accomplish bridging the digital divide with not only fiber, but with fixed wireless access services as well. So it's the space race is heating up, and it's going to be exciting to kind of watch and see what unfolds there. But let's move to my third and final topic this week. So I want to talk about AT&T. So they announced 3Q earnings, and they were quite strong. So I mean, I'll hit some of the highlights and then provide kind of two key insights here. So from a subscriber growth perspective, over 700,000 postpaid phone net adds, 338,000 AT&T fiber net adds, which that is the second best quarter ever for the company. And that marks 11 straight quarters with more than 200,000 net fiber adds. So their fiber business is on fire. I wrote a Forbes article after I spent time with John in Evansville, and absolutely, fiber first is AT&T strategy. It's driving tremendous ARPU in their home broadband business. It's also providing critical backhaul their fiber for their 5G mobile build out as well. So, but at a high level, what I like about this is two things. One, I mentioned the fiber growth and how that's supporting backhaul, but secondly, I think which is also really important is that they also reported significant momentum in building out their mid-band spectrum assets, and that's mission critical. You know, we were talking about performance earlier, and Verizon's sort of missteps there and not having the proper spectrum to deliver the right 5G experience for its subscribers. And AT&T is making significant momentum. Not only are they deploying C-band, but they're also deploying 110 as well. And that's been a little bit easier for them and faster for them to do that. And I guess as a final note, and then I'll toss it to you, what's interesting is when you look at their mid-band pops and the forecasts compared to fiber, basically the fiber sub base is surpassing the non-fiber base. So that's pretty significant. But what I'd love to get your insights as well.
Yeah, so I wanna talk about the mid-band pump. So they actually upgraded their forecast for how many customers they expect to cover due to this accelerated deployment roadmap. So they now say that they expect to have 130 million pops by the end of the year instead of 100 million. And like you said, their fiber sub base is now bigger than their non-fiber base, which is huge. And then they also said that they now have a live 5G standalone core, which is also interesting. So
I didn't catch that. Where did you catch that?
This was on RCR Wireless.
Okay,
so,
cool.
It says Chris Sambar, AT&T EVP of Networking Strategy, on a call with journalists this morning, which was yesterday, said that he confirmed that AT&T has a live 5G standalone core, which is already carrying traffic for commercial customers, which I find very interesting as a statement, considering that Verizon made a similar statement last week.
Right.
So as we had both predicted, AT&T and Verizon are going to start talking about standalone, and like that, we now have standalone at all three carriers.
Yeah.
But, or at least they're publicly talking about it now, which is something that we couldn't have said 6 months ago or even 2 months ago. Yeah. So I think we're going to gear up for a lot of standalone talk next year. I think that's a trend that everybody should be looking to, and standalone means new use cases, thankfully, finally. So I'm very excited for what this means, because now we can start talking about real use cases and network slicing, and my heart is beating. But I also wanted to add that I just think AT&T is kind of on a tear. And I think AT&T's growth is really a component of their dual mid-band rollout. And their network speeds are up, their subs are up, their revenues are up, everything's looking peachy, and all they had to do was stop focusing on content and just focus on the network. I'm not particularly in love with the way Discovery is handling the Warner merger and the amount of things that they're killing and what they're doing to some TV shows and movies and things like that. But AT&T is focusing on its network, and it's showing real dividends. And I think a strong AT&T is a good thing for everybody. And I think next year is going to be extremely interesting between all three carriers having SA, Verizon's network getting better, T-Mobile continuing to chug along, and AT&T getting a lot better. So I really think next year is going to be really interesting for a lot of reasons. And I think people are going to start getting more excited about 5G because there's going to be a lot more to talk about.
I agree. And I've spoken to this point before, standalone unlocks the true promise of 5G. I've spent time with Chris Sambar. He runs network for AT&T now. Scott Mayer retired a few months ago. Chris is a very pragmatic guy, very approachable, much like John, and he's the right guy for the job. And so, I don't think it's interesting. I didn't catch this. I mean, you and I have been pretty busy the last couple of weeks, but it's interesting to hear that Chris sort of let that cat out of the bag, and I'm sure it's time to the fact that Verizon let their 5G SA core cat out of the bag as well. So yeah, I think 2023 is going to be fun to see. Both Verizon and AT&T really drive their SA deployments home. But let's move to your third and final topic this week. You want to talk about Nokia and Ericsson, and they're forecasting a 5G slowdown in infrastructure spending.
Yeah, so this was kind of a derivative of um, both Nokia and Verizon and Ericsson talking about infrastructure and revenues. So Ericsson is really struggling financially right now. Um, their share price is down considerably.
You mean Nokia? You mean Nokia, not Ericsson, right?
Ericsson as well.
Okay.
Both of them share prices are down quite a bit.
Okay, share price, not overall financials. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that's accurate.
So, for example, Ericsson's share price in January was like 120 SEK, which is the Swedish kroner, and now it's down to 60. So it's literally half where it was at the beginning of this year. So they're really struggling in terms of their actual share price, and they were down 16% after their publication of their earnings yesterday. So, the truth is that Ericsson is still a very large company, and they're if you look at their P&Ls, their net profit dropped 7% to $480 million. So I think it really looks down to the just nitpicking on the financials. I think the other thing is really the outlook. Ericsson generates 39% of its revenue in North America, so it's very heavily exposed to North America. Yeah. And it was its fastest growing regional market for the third quarter. But the big issue is a lot of the carriers are kind of guiding for lower capex in 2023, which makes sense when you look at Verizon having an aggressive rollout this year and AT&T both having an aggressive rollout this year. So I think a lot of the rollouts that are considerable in size are happening this year. So financially, things look fairly good this year, even though Ericsson's struggling. Their profits aren't that great for Q3. Revenues are still good. Yeah. And the real thing is, share price is definitely more of a forward-looking thing, or at least in theories. I'm not the biggest fan of share price and stock market and a lot of how the theories work, because it's supposed to be rational, but it's not rational. But really what it is that the expectation for both Nokia and Ericsson is that operators are going to be spending less next year on their 5G infrastructure. Yeah. And my thought process here is, yes, I completely agree with that perception. However, I also believe that there are going to be other countries where there are going to be opportunities for growth, like India, because India is only starting to roll out their 5G network at the end of this quarter, basically, which means that there's going to be a lot more ramp to happen. And we just talked about Nokia and Ericsson signing deals with, Reliance to build out their network. So I think it's going to be, an interesting climate, but I also don't think things are as bad as I think a lot of, financial analysts are looking at, because I think you're going to see a drop in US, but you're also going to see a gain in other regions that haven't really built out 5G like the US has. So I think, they are a little overexposed to the US market, which is probably the biggest factor here. But there's also some talk about, the Vonage acquisition for Ericsson, right? And how that cost them $6 billion, and whether that really is going to generate real profits for the company. Vonage is profitable, but people are skeptical whether or not it will really benefit long-term to the Ericsson business. So I think Ericsson, is a very large company. They've got a lot going on now. They have lots of interesting business units. And I think the real challenge is going to be for them to integrate all of these new units into a single cohesive company that can really start to churn out interesting businesses and opportunities for carriers, I think, to offer new services. I think the real big thing in my mind is how can how can Ericsson and Nokia enable the Verizons and the AT&Ts and the T-Mobiles of the world to deliver new use cases with their infrastructure and potentially services. Obviously, there's an entire ecosystem of companies doing that as well, but I think the infrastructure vendors also need to get involved there to get a piece of that pie.
No, I agree. And I think standalone will drive some of that. Actually, it's interesting. So I was in Santa Clara earlier this week. I hosted a panel at the Ericsson Imagine Possible event, and on enterprise and different emerging use cases and that sort of thing. And afterwards, I had spoken with Nicholas Heuveldop, who is the president of Ericsson Americas, over video. We had our first opportunity to meet in person. And so I think there are two opportunities for Ericsson that they can lean into that that Nokia necessarily can't. And so number one, the private networking opportunity within enterprise. So with Cradlepoint, you are going to see some announcements over the next several weeks that is going to sort of fortify Cradlepoint's position to really be aggressive within the enterprise. They've already had a footprint there with private networking solutions, but from my perspective, I've been pre-briefed on this. I can't share it because it's under embargo, but I think you're going to see some significant additional capabilities come. And so outside of the mobile network operator segment, I think there's some upside for Ericsson there. And I also had a very frank discussion with him on Vonage and the value of Vonage, based on the price. Because if you think about the price that was paid for Ericsson, $1 billion, that translates to pretty measurable value. $6 billion with Vonage. Vonage has, most people remember Vonage as just the VoIP company, but actually Vonage pivoted a few years ago. Nicholas kind of brought me kind of up to speed on this, and they serve a lot of underlying infrastructure for IP networks, and specifically, he provided an example. If you shop with Home Depot, if you shop with Amazon, a lot of those, those text updates on shipping and delivery, the Vonage platform supports a lot of that activity. So yeah, time will tell. I mean, that was a huge acquisition. $6 billion that's a big enchilada to digest. But I think if you look at the private networking opportunity for Ericsson, and then you also look at leveraging some of the IP that maybe people aren't as familiar with Vonage, bringing to market, I think there's some opportunity there. But with that, my friend, it's been another great podcast this week. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insights on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Whaletown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Sog. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.